Dear students, welcome to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. This class is for BCom first year, second semester students of Commerce Department. The subject is Principles of Management, Block 4, Delegation and Decentralization. The topic of discussion is Delegation of Authority. Well, in this class, we will discuss about the principles of delegation of authority as well as the barriers of delegation of authority. We'll start with principles of delegation. Well, any principles are basically the guidelines that ensure effective delegation. They basically help manager distribute work properly and evenly according to the capability of the employees and what work they can do perfectly according to that. It also maintains balance between the authority as well as responsibility. Now, let's start with the first principle of delegation, that is principle of clarity, which means task and responsibility should be clearly defined. Also, subordinate must understand the expected result. So that is the concept of clarity. That means unless you define the roles, unless you define the responsibility performed by the employees, they will be clear in nature. The subordinate will not understand it properly. It's the subordinate, if they will not understand properly, they are not going to give you the expected result. So that is the importance of defining the roles, defining the task and responsibility clearly. Also, clear communication is very important under principle of clarity. So it will avoid any type of confusion and any errors will be removed. So that is the principle of clarity. That is, task and responsibility should be clearly defined. Moving on to the next principle, which is principle of accountability. Accountability, that is, manager remain accountable for the final result, whereas he will give the duties to other subordinate, he will assign work to their subordinate, he will ask them they can take their own decisions while completing the task, but at the end of the day, at the end of the task, he will remain accountable for the final result. Also, subordinate must report their performance to the manager, to the person who is accountable. So, end of the day, the report, the final report has to be submitted to the manager. Also, very important part about accountability is that it cannot be delegated. So, that is the principle of accountability. That is, manager will remain accountable for the final results and the person assigned the delegation will report to the subordinate. Also, the accountability cannot be delegated. Next principle is principle of unity of command. We have studied that under Fayol's principles, that is, subordinate should receive orders only from one superior and it will avoid any kind of confusion and conflict when orders are coming from one superior. So, there will no scope of any confusion and no scope of any conflict because there is only one person who will be responsible for giving the command. Also, one important point about unity of command is that it will ensure better coordination between the employees as well as the manager. So, that is the principle of unity of command. Next principle is principle of trust and supervision. That is, manager must trust the ability of subordinate. That is, when he is assigning any task to the subordinate, he need to trust that the subordinate is going to perform the task by using all the resources with perfection and effectively. So, that is the principle of trust, as well as it provides guidance when required. It is not like that when the work is being delegated to the supervisors, there is no role of manager left. Manager has to give guidance to the subordinate, as well as whenever there is a requirement of any help or any kind of problem arises, manager has to be there. So, that is the principle of supervision. Also, manager need to monitor progress to ensure successful completion of the task. So, that is the principle of trust and supervision. That is, manager must trust the abilities of subordinate, right? Also, it provide guidance whenever it is required and monitor the progress to ensure successful completion of the task. So these were the 4 principles of delegation of authority. Now we will talk about a balance between authority and responsibility. Well, authority given must match the responsibility assigned, which is very important. That is, there has to be a balance. That means how much authority is being given, that much responsibility has to be there with the subordinate. Also, too little authority makes work difficult. That means if the work is more, authority has to be more. Too little authority is going to create mess only, that is. Also, too much authority may lead to misuse of power as well. So, balance is very important between authority and responsibility. Now, that was all about the principles and the balance between authority and responsibility. Now, we will discuss few barriers to delegation. Well, there are 3 sides of these barriers though. On the first side, we have the manager's sides. First, we will discuss that. So, on the manager's side, the first barrier is there is lack of trust in subordinate. When the manager is not going to trust the subordinate, it will be a problem for the completion of task. Then there is fear of losing control or authority. Manager may feel ki if I delegate all my work to my subordinate, I may lose control or authority over them. Then there is a belief that I can do it by myself. Manager might feel ki why should I delegate? I can do it myself better. Right. So, it should not be there when we are talking about delegation of authority. So, that belief has not to be there. Then poor ability to plan and assign tasks. See, when you are delegating any work to the subordinate, that has to be planned properly, as well as the task and the work which has to be done need to be properly programmed, properly framed in a proper manner, so that work should be done in a proper and a smoother way. So, the ability of a manager of not doing so will lead to a great loss to the organization. Next is reluctance to accept the mistakes. So, most of the time when the manager holds the accountability of the delegation, he is reluctant to accept the mistakes made by him or by the manager. So, that is a great barrier to delegation from the manager's sides. Now, moving on to the next side, that is on the subordinate side. That is, the first barrier is lack of confidence or competence. See, the work is been assigned, the responsibility has been given, the authority has been given, but the subordinate is feeling that I am not a perfect person or I am not the correct person to do the task. So, in this case, the outcome is not going to be of good quality. Right. Also, there will be a fear of failure or criticism. See, whenever we do any task for a first time, there is a fear of failure as well as a fear of criticism, that what will people say and or whether I'll be able to do this or not perfectly. So, that is the fear of failure, and criticism will always be there when the subordinate is performing the task the very first time. Next is avoidance of additional responsibility. So, the subordinates sometimes feel like whatever the task has been assigned to us, we are responsible for that work only. We are not supposed to take responsibility for any other work. So, that also may lead to it might hamper the outcome which a person is going to serve. So, that is the avoidance of additional responsibility. Then lack of motivation. Motivation is very important when we talk about delegation of authority. The person to whom the task is being assigned need to be well motivated and coordinated person. So, now coming to the third side, that is the organizational barriers. So, under organizational barriers, the first barrier is unclear authority as well as the responsibility structure, which I have mentioned earlier, that plan need to be made properly, proper coordination has to be there, a proper plan need to be chalked out properly. Also, inadequate training and resources may cause an organizational barrier to them. Poor communication system also serve as an additional barrier to the organization. Also, absence of performance evaluation as well as feedback system will serve as organizational barrier. So, these are the 3 sets of barriers on the sides of manager, the subordinate and the organization. All in all, we will say that delegation improve efficiency as well as productivity. Effective delegation requires clear principles. We all have studied in this today's class. Also, manager must overcome barrier for success. Manager is responsible for all the three sides, that is his, subordinates and the organization. So it becomes a duty of manager to overcome the barriers for success. So that was all about the delegation, the barriers and the principles of delegation of authority. So that was all in this class. Thank you for listening to the class.